Hi, everybody. I'm Andrew Rudd. I am a filmmaker who screened a film at Salute Your Shorts a couple of years ago. And when they asked me if I wanted to be the audience for the Talk Back to the Filmmakers in this digital film festival, I was like, of course I do, because I know that as a filmmaker, there's nothing better than hearing from your audience. And I only wish that I could, actually say all the things that the audience is thinking, but I'm trying my best to imagine all the different people who might be in the audience of each film and asking a bunch of questions. And today, I'm super excited to get to talk to Erica Tremblay, who made the film Little Chief. Erica, thank you for talking to me.
Hello, hello. So glad to be here.
Yeah, I'm so glad to have you here. And your film is so, at every turn in the film, and they're gentle turns. It reveals something not only about your characters in the story, but for me at least, it reveals something about myself, because I kept on expecting the film to go in particular directions. Because I see somebody smoking a joint in the first frame of the film. I'm like, okay, well this in Hollywood grammar means this, and that's not what it means in your film. And that's a gift to the audience, that you kind of keep on like drawing us in on this journey with these characters who, for a film that isn't like super dialogue heavy at all, really is revelatory about their humanity. I'm really interested in hearing like where you started in this story. Like was it the characters? Was it the situation? Like, tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, thank you for, that expression. I think that's what we were going for. That's what I was going for. I have been a doc. I come from a doc background, and that's what I know. And I really have always wanted to push myself into fiction. And so there was a Sundance lab deadline that was like coming up, and I had kind of seen this, the Indigenous lab, the Native Film Lab deadline come around year after year. And so this particular year, I was like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to write something. And so I wrote it in a weekend at a coffee shop. And in 2 days, I just sat down and I wrote Little Chief. And I just kind of listened to that advice, write what you know. And so I really was feeling homesick at the time. And my mother's been an educator in our community, actually at that school that we filmed at for almost 30 years. Wow. So just over the years of experiencing going to school in that community when I was a kid, and then also watching my mom and the sacrifices that she kind of makes against all odds, and even in some cases against her own health and need for self-care, I just made this kind of like amalgamation of a bunch of different true stories. And it just kind of came out really quickly. And what I really wanted to do was reveal a world and characters that a lot of people don't have necessarily a background knowledge of. I think, there's not a lot of Indigenous cinema, and the portrayals of Indigenous people that do exist are often in a time capsule, pre-1800s. Yes. And so I wanted the characters to be extremely layered, and that things would be revealed about their character and about their situation as the film went on. And I always love like a good like gotcha moment. So I really wanted to open up the film. You're like, is she a drug addict? Is she, what's happening? And then why is this kid getting in this car with her? She's doing drugs. And then you're like, oh shit, she's his teacher. And she's actually here to save his day. So I wanted to have that complexity between their relationship. So I'm glad that came across.
It really did. So that is interesting. Like, so I found out after I watched your movie that you had a doc background, and I looked a little bit, and actually as soon as I knew that about you, I did think that this idea that what a film has the ability to do is as a gift to give to others a truer representation of the world as it is, instead of the world as we like imagine it to be because of romantic tales that are laced through with power and repression. So like I loved that vibe, and I felt it very strongly. Tell me about how the process was. Like, was it a huge learning process to go from doc development to narrative development?
Yeah, it really was. And, you know, I've always wanted to be a fiction storyteller. So the only reason I really ever came to doc was because I just didn't have any opportunities. Like, nobody was giving me notes on my fiction films. Like, nobody was helping me. Like, I feel like, you know, I owe a lot of being able to cross over to a lot of the discussions around the Me Too movement and things like that. So for me, you know, 10 years ago when I wanted to enter into this industry and nobody cared about my fiction screenplays, doc was a way that, oh, I can just buy a camera, find a subject matter, and still make stories.
Mm-hmm.
So it really has been a means to an end, because I was like, well, if I can prove that I'm a storyteller in this aspect, then maybe someone is going to see that I really want this and I'm capable of doing it and telling stories. But I'm really, really glad that I had that experience. And I also worked in advertising for a while. And so for me, I'm realizing that it really is all about story. And it's all about conveying a journey and conveying an emotional arc and construction to the audience. And so for me, with Little Chief, I was able to kind of employ the realism that I love in fiction storytelling through I'm like, well, all we just have to do is set up this world and watch it unfold.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a little bit strange to be in control of the story, because when you're doing doc, you're just not in control at all. Right. And so I remember the day that we shot with the kids, some of the magic that we got through them was my, I guess, courage to just let the camera roll. Mm-hmm. Whereas I think that if I had only come from a traditional fiction storytelling background, I might have cut sooner. But I was just like, no, these kids aren't actors. They're not, they are actors. They're not trained actors. Right. And the moments that we're going to get that authenticity from them is when we just see them in their element. And all those kids are members of my nation, the Seneca Cayuga Nation, and they all go to that school. So they were all feeling like at home. And the longer I just let the camera roll, the more authentic their selves were. And so there was some things to learn about it. But again, I think it's like a story is a story is a story.
Mm-hmm. And have you been able to share the film with your nation, with specifically the local people there, with the kids? How's the response? Tell me about that experience for you.
Yeah, I mean, that's been like the best part of this process, was not just the going back and sharing the film, but the process of making it. I always tell this story, but the day that we shot with the kids in the school, I don't know what I was thinking, but I wore overalls. Like, you know, they have lots of pockets and you're on set and you have all this stuff. And the kids just relentlessly teased me the entire day. Like, I was not cool. I was just like this like lady in overalls that was trying to get them to do things. And they were just such a joy to collaborate with on the day of filming. And it was so special to get to be there in their environment with them and do something special with them. And it was great. Like, they're, you know, they got to see the cameras and how to tell stories, and maybe something a little bigger than what they're normally exposed to. So it was just really special. And it was the first place that we screened the film. We went back and we did like a little red carpet premiere for them. Yeah. And, you know, a lot of people have been like, well, it's such a heavy subject matter. And I'm like, but this is like every day. Like, not just for Indigenous kids, but like kids deal with a lot, no matter what culture and community they come from. And they're so much more mature than we give them credit for. But they just loved seeing themselves up on the screen and get to dress up for a night and have fun. So
I'm sure.
No, I'm so appreciative of them.
And you said that this school, this actual school, is the same school that you went to. And so, like,
so my mom teaches at that school. I actually went to a different school, okay. A little bit of a larger school, but somewhat similarly. Like, I went to this, I'm a Seneca Indian. Like, I went to the Indian school, and that's the Little Chiefs. So like, there's like, you know, a different school. So and the school that I went to was more, I guess I should say, diverse in terms of it wasn't as many Native kids went to the school that I went to. And Turkey Ford, that school that we shot in, is predominantly Indigenous students that go there, but it's still a public school. Mm-hmm. But yeah, so, my sister taught there, my mother taught there. So it's just like, it feels like family and home, and like, you know, I call the woman who's the superintendent my auntie. So it just is, it's a institution in that area that is, it's complicated in its relationship to the community in terms of educating children outside of like cultural ways, but at the same time, like everyone has stories about that school.
Right. Small schools have that ability to sort of hold stories better. And I think that's probably even more the case for an Indigenous community who kind of has to hold their stories with great care because they can be a threat. So I'm curious about a lot of times when someone decides to make a film and show it to everybody, but it's a film about their community, a film that wants to represent more faithfully their community and who they are now and what that's like. There's kind of like, sometimes I've heard people talk about dialectical pulls in either direction. Like in order to satisfy this more mainstream audience, I could do this. But in order to be more faithful to this audience, did you feel that tension at all during this film? Like, I'm especially wondering about the ending, but like, I'm interested in any of it.
Yes, and you definitely have hit on the most controversial part of my film, which is the ending. Well, two things actually. The most questions that I get about the film are the fact that she smokes so much, and then the ending. And yeah, I was just having a conversation about this yesterday about this. You know, when you see just like a film about Americana, for example, that's, let's say, made by a white person, there's not a lot of explaining that person has to do about what the story is. We're at a baseball field, or we're in a small town in Ohio. Like, you don't even need to know that. Like, I got notes from non-Indigenous folks that were like, well, we should see a road sign that says reservation. And I'm like, well, no, like, you don't see a sign every time a film starts that we're like in the Midwest. So there were some choices that I made that I was just like, this film ultimately is for my community. Good. And I think that once I just defined that, it made the pressure to please all of these other notes a lot less. I was like, you know what, if other people don't get it, that's fine. But like, I'm making this for my community to take it back, and they don't need to see a sign that says reservation. You get it clearly that there's something happening here. We're somewhere in this world. And I didn't think it really mattered whether they were on a reservation or not. They just were. And I think the ending, one of the notes I got in the very beginning of the process on the script even was, well, she should hug him or something at the end.
Yes.
And I was like, she would never hug him. Like, number one, he's probably being, dealing with some level of violence and like trauma. Like, he doesn't want to be hugged. She's not going to, like, this woman doesn't hug her own children. She doesn't have that kind of energy to share that much of herself. And so for me, it was like being really authentic to who my mother is and how she would really respond in that situation, which is, we're just going to sit here and get through this moment together, because that's all we can do. And my mother has been suspended from school twice as a teacher for smoking on campus. So this is real, right? It's not some sort of like Hollywood, like sexy woman smoking a cigarette. No, this woman is like getting through her moment, trauma to trauma, but yet existing in this beautiful space with this beautiful humanity, and both can exist simultaneously. And I think that that's what I really wanted to show at the ending, is that there are all sorts of ways to love, and there are all sorts of ways to be generous with your spirit and time.
Mm-hmm. So one of the things that I do for a living is I teach. So I teach students, I show them movies, and I try to show them movies that are not like the movies they've seen before. And I always say that really what you want to do is you want to let the filmmaker teach you how to watch the movie, because they have something to tell you that's different than what you've seen before, and that's a gift. And so when I kind of got to the moment in the film, and I'm like, okay, I know that we're coming near the end, and this is not a super conventional ending. what does the filmmaker want me to like feel? So I asked myself, the hard question. And I was flooded with a sense when I sort of yielded to that question and to the reality that was on the film. Um, I just had a sense that like maybe there are like 1,000 different kinds of happy endings in the world, and that maybe this happy ending has something to teach me about, like what's good enough, or what's, like I mean, because really it is beautiful. I mean, like if I just describe what's happening in this frame, there's a woman sitting with a boy, both of whom have suffered some sort of trauma, we guess, from her back at the beginning, and from the things that he has explicitly acknowledged, and they're with each other. I mean, what is more beautiful? I mean, I'm not saying that that's what you intended for me to get, but I loved the ending. And so I'm glad that you held true to the vision that made sense to you. I do think that's a gift to all of us.
Well, you're one of my people then, because that's the way I've kind of looked at it. And my producer as well, we've just been like, well, if people get it, they get it. And if they don't, they don't. And, I really appreciate what you just said about the happiness of the ending, because that's really what I wanted to show, is like there is joy there, and you kind of have to dig a little bit to see it, and you have to work through the complexities of who these characters are. And I really just wanted to leave it open-ended, because I wanted the audience to think about it and be like, what happens next? Right? Like, I did not make Little Chief to be a feature film. Like, so many people have been like, okay, so you're going to make this into a feature. And I was like, no, I meant to leave it that way, because I wanted people to be like, oh, she's going to get up tomorrow and it's going to be a different kid in the classroom that's having problems. Bear is going to get up tomorrow and he's going to have a different issue. Like maybe he's, and that is the way that we all exist at some varying levels of is it a good day or a bad day? And some of us have more bad days or more good days than others. But I saw the ending of this film first. That was the first frame that I saw in my head. And I was just like, how do we get there? Yeah. So it wasn't really negotiable for me when I was making it.
Well, that's even a really helpful thing to all the filmmakers who are watching this, because lots of people are either filmmakers or aspiring filmmakers or storytellers who watch films at film festivals. And I think like that inspires me, like I always think that if you can see one image from your film, like truly, that can provide like a moral compass for you. And that's.
Yeah. And I also think like there's so much ego involved in all of this. It's also a learning process of knowing where to negotiate and where not to negotiate. And I think that I got so much great mentorship and so much great feedback on the script and the edit that definitely the film changed over time, and it matured and I matured in my process. And so it's not to say, like F everyone and like, but you sit down and you say, these are the things that I'm willing to negotiate on, and these are the things that I'm not. And I think that as I move forward as a filmmaker, that's what I'm learning, is like, to admit to myself where I need the help, and then be like, no, these are the things that I actually have worked through and am standing firm on, which is not easy.
Those are such helpful words. Thank you. Can I take a moment and congratulate you? You were admitted into a Sundance Fellowship. That's an amazing thing for most of the world.
Yeah.
And it sounds like you did get a lot of mentorship. Is there anything that you want to say about that whole program and process?
I would just say that, that having gone through the Native Film Lab and getting the support from Bird Running Water and his team at Sundance has just been incredible. And then to actually premiere the film at Sundance was just like another level. Not every film that gets made through the labs, like it has to go through the same submission process. And it really felt like coming full circle to make the film with their support and then have the ability to screen there. And I'm working on a feature film now that just made it into another Indigenous film intensive lab at Sundance.
Yeah.
So I feel so lucky and encouraged to be kind of a part of that family, and I'm just completely wide open to learning and, you know, progressing more and having that, you know, I encourage everyone to apply to every lab that exists, because my experience with them has been very formidable for sure.
That's wonderful.
Thank you for the congrats.
Yeah, that's a big deal. It's wonderful. And I was, one of my questions was going to be, how are you going to recover from having so much good feedback to now your next project, you have to wander into the wilderness by yourself, but you don't have to, and that's wonderful. And that's great.
Yeah.
I do want to make sure to ask, I always like to ask this question during my Q&As, if I remember. So those of the viewers who got to watch your film and now really want to follow your career, is there a place that you suggest? Like, is there social media? Is it a website? What's the best way to keep in touch with what Erica Tremblay is doing next?
Yeah, so you can find me on Instagram at Erica J. Tremblay, and you can Google me and find like my website. And it's funny, I share a name with a Canadian child actress.
Oh.
I get tweeted at a lot where it's like, your episode on, you know, something about Julie last night, you were so great. And I'm just like, and I'm sure that her mother, you know, is like, why does my daughter have to share the name with this like radical queer indigenous woman and who's constantly talking about vaginas and her period? And so like, don't get me confused with the child actress, but if you just Google Erica Tremblay, you'll find me and her, and maybe you'll become fans of both. Let's hope.
Let's hope. Let's include. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time, Erica. I really appreciate it. I wish you the best. I can't wait to see your films going forward. Thank you.
Excellent, Yama. Thank you.